13 years ago, Michael tossed a copy of the divorce papers at me, saying, "I've sold the house because I'm moving in with my girlfriend." At that moment, I couldn't quite grasp what he meant. "So, Susan, since we're already divorced, just take James and get out," he declared. Those words have stayed with me ever since. I was shocked by what James said when he returned from a job interview. I asked the HR interviewer, "Do you condone affairs?" Suddenly, my son's face was filled with an unprecedented smile. The interviewer seemed to deny it. So I continued, "That's odd. Then why are you here?" Yes, the interviewer at that time was indeed my ex-husband, Michael. "My name is Susan, and I'm 48 years old. I work at a call center for an insurance company. My only family is my son, James. We were abandoned by my husband, Michael, 13 years ago. I met Michael when I was 21. I was a high school graduate and had just started working as a clerk at a subsidiary of a pharmaceutical company. I met Michael, who was 27 at the time and had been assigned from the headquarters. He seemed interested in me for some reason and started inviting me to dinner. At that time, I had just become of legal drinking age. I was definitely thrilled to be asked out by an elite from the headquarters. This continued several times, and we started dating. Eventually, I got pregnant. I was shaken. I thought he would be angry and break up with me. But then, Michael proposed marriage. When we went to greet my parents, he even told my father, who was still alive at that time, "I will make your daughter happy." At that time, marriages due to pregnancy were not viewed very positively and were often referred to as shotgun weddings, so our ceremony was quite simple. Then, our son James was born. Around that time, Michael returned to work at the headquarters, and I followed him, becoming a stay-at-home mom. From then on, I devoted myself to taking care of the home. When James started elementary school, we bought a house with some help from Michael's parents. I thought I was living a happy life. But I was turning a blind eye to the fact that Michael was coming home less and less as James got older. Having married young, at 21, I had no idea what a normal marital life was like. I never questioned why I didn't know any of Michael's colleagues or superiors. Looking back, there were plenty of signs that could have led to divorce. And then, the day James turned 14 arrived. Michael left us with these words: "I've already filed for divorce and sold the house, so get out." From a happy 35-year-old stay-at-home mom, I suddenly became a single mother with a 14-year-old son. When I returned to my parents' house without any notice, my brother and his wife were cold towards me. By then, my father had passed away, and the house belonged to my brother and his wife. My mother, who was around 60 at that time, was overshadowed by my strong-willed sister-in-law and my blunt nieces. In that environment, James and I were told, "It's fine for a little while, but find a job and leave as soon as possible." At that time, I couldn't immediately think of any job I could do. A high school graduate office clerk. No skills. Yet, despite that, the two of us had to find a way to survive. I scoured employment magazines, searching for a job that could support my growing son and me. Still, I was fortunate. James was 14 years old. Although it's said to be a difficult age, he was reasonably sensible. It was much better than being a mother with a baby. That's when I dove into a call center job at an insurance company. My office experience helped me with the phone handling. Initially, I was a contract employee. And after a few years, I managed to become a full-time employee. However, at first, I was completely exhausted every day by the unfamiliar world. But as I continued with this job, I realized something. I knew nothing at the time of my divorce. I was a high school graduate from a non-academically distinguished family. Even though it's not everything, my ignorance was one reason I ended up in financial trouble during the divorce. It was a divorce due to infidelity. I should have demanded child support from my husband, but the thought never occurred to me. Neither my mother nor my brother thought of it either. Well, my mother might have, but if my brother had any concern for me, he might have sought advice from someone, but he didn't. I realized I had been unfairly treated only after joining the insurance company and learning new things. But by then, it was too late. That's why I wanted my son to attend the highest level of schooling he desired. Wisdom and knowledge can save you. I didn't want him to end up like me. And now, 13 years later, our jobs, salaries, and lives have stabilized. James entered a prestigious national university for science and even went on to a doctoral program. As a mother, it was astonishing. Moreover, he said he'd manage the tuition somehow. How could he manage that with his busy studies? He found a non-repayable scholarship and secured it for himself. All I did was sign in the Guardian section. 4 years in undergraduate, 5 in graduate school. He demonstrated his abilities during his studies, attracting scouts from various companies. This is truly a case of a black hen lays white eggs. James's future must be filled with light. Yet, occasionally, I'm reminded of that day. Yes, the day my ex-husband abandoned me. That event still swirls like a dark vortex within me. It truly came out of the blue. As soon as he came home, Michael flung a crumpled piece of paper at James and me. Upon unfolding it, I found it was a copy of the divorce papers. I had no memory of signing them. Yet, my name was written on it, in handwriting strikingly similar to mine. When I asked him what he meant by this, Michael said, "I've sold the house because I'm moving in with my girlfriend." I couldn't quite understand what Michael was implying. The idea of divorce was completely unexpected to me. "So, Susan, since the divorce is already finalized, just take James and leave," he insisted. He mentioned something about not sparing us if we didn't leave within 3 days. I was 35 at the time. Having been just a housewife for 14 years, I had no idea what to do next, so I headed to my parents' house. I can still hear my husband's voice from that time. Maybe I should just forget about it. After all, James and I are living a relatively settled life now. It's not that I'm holding on to the past. It's the frustration with my past self for not being able to do anything and the resentment towards Michael. I know that I could do something now if I were in the same situation, and that's precisely why. On a day off, I was looking forward to a rare lie-in when my phone started ringing. The number on the screen was not saved in my contacts, so I decided to ignore it and went back to bed. But the call kept ringing, pausing, and then starting again. Eventually, I heard a voice from the voicemail. It was my former mother-in-law. She kept repeating, "Please let me speak to your son." I wondered what she meant, but I decided not to answer the call directly. By evening, James came home in a suit, which was unusual. When I told him about the call, he burst out laughing in a way I had never seen before, saying, "I knew they would come." He was shaking with laughter, banging the table, and even shedding tears. "James, what did you do?" "I had a job interview today, remember?" "I told you." "Don't lie. Tell me the truth." "It's not exactly a lie," he said. Then James started to recount what had happened that day. Indeed, there had been an interview. It was with a pharmaceutical company that had been scouting him for some time. But the problem was the company itself. The pharmaceutical company James mentioned. That was where I once worked as an office clerk at its subsidiary. "Oh, it's no coincidence," James said nonchalantly. "By the way, the HR director who conducted the interview was Michael." "What did you say?" "The funny thing is, this guy didn't realize at all that I was his son." "Did you realize it was him?" "Of course. After all, I didn't need this interview in the first place." "Is that so?" "Yeah. This company was scouting me. There was no need for an interview or anything. But as the HR director, he must have seen your resume, right?" "He must have seen it, right?" "He should have, but my appearance has changed a lot since middle school, hasn't it? The hairstyle, the vibe. Everything." "Well, yes, that's true. 13 years is a long time. Plus, I doubt he even remembered my face well back then." That made sense. I had been so caught up in my own situation that I forgot. For James, Michael had also become a distant figure. Besides, seeing my current address and academic background, even if the names matched, he wouldn't have guessed I was his son. That could be true. James was only a slightly above average student in his second year of middle school, 13 years ago. However, after the divorce and transferring schools, he began studying incredibly hard. Suddenly, his grades shot up to the top of his class. He got into a high school that matched his achievements and maintained nearly the top spot in his science classes. Then he went on to a renowned national university. With a recommendation from Professor Smith, whom he met in his third year, James spent 5 years in graduate school. from master's to doctoral programs. During that time, he seems to have achieved a lot in complex areas that I don't quite understand. The scouting means companies saw his accomplishments and wanted him, apparently. Several companies in the chemical industry were interested. So, I was in a position to choose. James casually remarked. That's why I requested the interview. I had researched and knew he was the HR director. I was astonished at how much he had prepared. But he didn't change his expression at all, even when he saw me. The interview was pretty standard. The difference, however, was that James had the opportunity to ask more questions. That's why I asked the HR interviewer, "Does your company condone affairs?" At that moment, James's face was filled with an unprecedented grin. And what did he answer? "Michael, I mean. Of course, that would not be ethically acceptable, can you believe that?" So I continued, "That's strange. Then why are you here?" And just like that, Michael's face froze. James couldn't stop chuckling. Then, thankfully, the managing director, Derek, sitting next to him asked what I meant by that. That's when I pulled this out. What he had was a crumpled piece of paper. Yes, the copy of the divorce papers Michael had thrown at me that day. This is a copy of the document my mother was deceived into submitting by this man years ago. What do you think about this? I asked. You've kept that copy all this time. I thought I had thrown it away. No, I had definitely thrown it in the trash. I didn't want to see it. I thought I had to throw everything away and leave. Yeah, I picked it up after you threw it away. That's why it's all wrinkled. I kept it in a clear file like this, thinking it should never be lost. Why did you? Because it's evidence of what he did to you and of forging an official document. Ah. It's not just that. There are various charges, like using a forged document. Besides, that divorce paper was invalid at the time. So if he married another woman, it would be bigamy. Bigamy? I'm not an expert, but I asked a friend from the law department in our university club about it, whether this could be a crime. A crime? Yeah, a clear crime. So, I made it clear on the spot. Isn't this forgery of an official document? Then I gave Derek a copy of the copy. I see. Since we have the original copy here, it's a copy of the copy. Because this copy has his fingerprints all over it. No way I was handing over the actual piece of evidence. So, what do you think he did? What did he do? He suddenly stood up and yelled, "James. Are you treating your own father like a criminal?" Then he turned to Derek, insisting that what I was saying was a complete lie, a misunderstanding. Huh? I couldn't help but feel amused. What was that man talking about? But credit to the executive, he seemed to understand what I was getting at. He turned the questioning on Michael. You know, there's always a power dynamic in companies, right? Michael was probably eyeing the executive position next. Derek seemed to be assessing the character. First, he had Michael leave the room, then turned to me and asked, "Did you request this interview not for employment but for this reason?" I did apologize, saying, "I am very grateful for the scouting from your company, and I do find it an attractive place. However, I wondered what it would mean if a company, which keeps such a person without questioning his ethics, were to employ me." So brazenly put. I was amazed at how smoothly he could say such things during an interview. Derek was really competent. Regardless of whether I would join or not, he thanked me for sharing. He mentioned remembering when Michael divorced and then remarried a much younger woman shortly after. Wondering why he would choose someone like that again. And he remembered you. Really? Yeah. You said our wedding was small, right? Derek was one of the few guests, as his boss at the time. I had no idea. But Michael had been telling people around him that he was the one cheated and just divorced. But Derek had wondered why he didn't take me with him. He even suspected from my photo and name that I might be the one. What? Taking advantage of the lack of knowledge you had back then, we were abandoned. I'm so sorry. I would definitely fight back with a lawyer now, but back then, It's okay. I know you were a full-time housewife all this time. Suddenly thrown out, having to work, and raising me to this point was hard enough. Hey, Mom, I barely remember him. He was always busy with work, or at least, that's what he claimed. Yes, Michael was hardly ever at home back then. Perhaps marrying me was a mistake for him in the first place. He rarely took me to his family's home. It was only during summer and Christmas, and even then, I was just stuck helping in the kitchen. And we always missed each other due to his work. He said we were buying a house, but he made all the decisions, and suddenly we were living there. I realized early in elementary school that our family was different from others. That's why I started to act out a bit in elementary school. What? You did? Yeah, had a bit of an early rebellious phase. So right after starting middle school, I started sensing another woman around him. You did. I didn't want to make you sad, so I didn't say anything. But I regretted not speaking up when he threw the divorce papers at you and told us to leave. His voice was strained. I had never heard James speak like that before. Mom, I decided then that I would acquire a weapon that no one could take away from me. A weapon? Something that made it so only I could do it. With that as my weapon, I thought I could someday confront him about what he did. Then James said, I feel bad for saying this, but I used your situation as a counterexample. A counterexample? Yes, maybe you're right. He easily discarded you, Mom, and no one could argue because you and your family lacked the knowledge to fight back. Honestly. I'm also angry at my uncle. You're not going to confront him, are you? No, that'd be too much trouble. But even if I do well and rise in a good company, I'll never associate with them again. Oh, except for Grandma. Is that so? I felt a bit relieved. Yeah. Because Grandma told me all she could remember about what happened back then and kept apologizing and crying. When did she tell you this? After I started university. My cousins from my uncle's side were flirting because I was a university student, which was creepy. I couldn't believe my nieces had acted like that. Hey, Mom, maybe we should take Grandma in, don't you think? What? She's always been sorry towards you. And it's painful to see her holding back because of my aunt and them. Thank you. After we finished talking, I mentioned something that had been bothering me. By the way, I've been getting a lot of calls from unknown numbers recently. Just show me, he took my phone. Ah, this. It's his family's number. Derek told me about it. James spat out disdainfully. Then he pressed the call button, switching to speaker mode. Hello? Hello, is that you, James? The voice from the other side was my former mother-in-law's. Calling me by my name as if she has the right, James muttered under his breath. Ah, I've heard from your father. You've gone all the way to a doctoral program at that university and are even being scouted by companies? Haven't you? To think a fine young man like you came from that mother. It must be thanks to our blood. What is she even saying? James muttered again. Hey, how about becoming our adopted son officially? You're going to be busy and need money, right? It would be better than staying with that poor woman. Besides, you're old enough for a good marriage proposal, aren't you? We can arrange plenty of those for you. How about it? Sounds good, doesn't it? Are you listening, James? I'm sorry for being such a woman. I coldly retorted into the phone. By any chance, were you informed that I was the one who had an affair? That's... Ah, I see, it's not the case. Since James said he won't let it go, I'll let you speak to him. Hello? I was surprised to hear from the company's executive, Derek, that you made it seem like my mother was the one who had an affair. So, you were in on it too? No, that's not true. We were deceived by Michael. Calling my mother that woman while you're at it, are you aware you were complicit in a crime? What? Unfortunately, it's past the statute of limitations, but your son is a bigamist who forged a divorce document to marry another woman. I'm ashamed to share his blood. Naturally, I want nothing to do with his parents. But you'll be hearing from the lawyer my mother and I are hiring soon. What about the inheritance? It would all go to you after I die. James snorted. I couldn't care less about that. You better worry about the alimony instead. With that, James ended the call. Did I go too far? I shook my head vigorously. At the same time, laughter welled up from the depths of my heart as if overflowing. If you've gone to these lengths for me, I must take action too. That's the spirit. James slapped my back in encouragement. Afterward, through James's friend, I was referred to a law firm and decided to claim compensation. Additionally, I demanded 4 years' worth of child support from Michael personally for James. Since then, my phone has been ringing off the hook. Me, a bigamist? What have you been telling her? You've ruined me. Do you want to destroy my wife and kids too? Come on, I provided you a good life for 14 years. Don't think this will end here, and so on. So, I sent back just one reply. Then why don't you just sell the current house? And so, I changed my phone number. As for the outcome, Michael, who faced a combined assault from James and me, ended up paying compensation, was ousted from his HR director position, and was demoted to a deputy factory manager at a distant factory. This information came from Derek, whom we met again. Apparently, the position was nothing more than a nominal one, where he couldn't defy the factory manager and was close to being a mere errand boy. Even though the statute of limitations has passed, the revelation of his multiple crimes has plummeted his reputation to rock bottom. He was on a corporate elite path, but that's all over now, Derek explained. The pharmaceutical company's factory is located far from New York. Due to the transfer, Michael had to sell his apartment and turn it into compensation payments for me. That was the only way he could afford to pay the amount we demanded. Moreover, his wife and children had to move with him. It seems his wife had nowhere else to turn. She, like me, married at 21 and had since been a full-time housewife to a husband of high status. That turned out to be her undoing. She wanted to stay in New York with the children, but that was impossible. Her parental home was as rural as the place Michael was transferred to. It seems she's not well liked by the in-laws. But I have my doubts about the in-laws too. Given how they treated me, it's hardly surprising, but they should have taken action with their son, who took a 21-year-old bride twice. They should have advised their criminal son before cutting off their undesirable grandchildren. Perhaps that's why they tried to get close to James. Ah, here's a competent grandson. But that has nothing to do with James. Speaking of which, I heard something interesting. My lawyer, Alex, shared with me after we settled the alimony issue. Ah, that man really is a city boy through and through. What does that mean? The place he's transferred to requires a car. I clapped my hands in realization. Trying to get a driver's license at over 50, both he and his wife are struggling at the driving school. His wife too. Well, without a car, you can't really live there. For taking the kids to and from school, shopping, and even part-time jobs in such rural areas won't hire you without transportation. I laughed at the thought. By the way, I have a driver's license. My mother insisted I get it, even going so far as to lend me the money for it. It was the right decision. Just hearing about their plight is amusing. Prideful former elite, over 50. May you learn the fear of obtaining a license while being scolded by driving instructors, all the while being bogged down by menial tasks every day. And the following year, James joined a research institute at another company, immersing himself in his own research and seeming genuinely happy every day. Our revenge was over. Now it's time to enjoy myself, my real youth starts now, he said. Well, that leaves the question of when he'll find someone special and settle down. Well, marrying early isn't always the best thing, right? My mother, who had moved in with us, mused thoughtfully. Exactly. I hope James takes his time to find the right partner, someone who truly suits him. With James's new job, we rented a slightly larger apartment somewhere in the middle of our workplaces and moved in. For a while, we three want to spend these newly peaceful days in calm contentment.